Okay, looks like we are live to the YouTube land. Hello, everybody out there. If you are just tuning in to watch this video on YouTube, make sure you check the video description below. We'll have a link that takes us right to the beginning of our discussion with Mr. Harris. So we're going to give just a couple minutes here, make sure everybody who's listening out there in YouTube land can hear everything okay. Is the audio okay for everybody? Rob, do you mind saying something real quick?
Mic check. What's everyone doing? What's up, fellas?
And Mr. Harris, if you don't mind just saying hello.
Mic check, 1, 2, testing, 1, 2.
All right, it sounds great to me. If I can get some comments here in the room, make sure we're good. Got sounds good, sounds good. All right, that's what we want to hear. Make sure everybody can hear everything great. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen and we're going to start up the podcast here. So hang on with us. All right, we'll start in 5, 4, 3, 2. What's up, guys? 12 Volt Talk, episode 19, with Wayne Harris of the DB Drag Racing Association, Term Pro, and Wayne Harris Enterprises. This is BigDWiz, youtube.com/BigDWiz, also oldschoolstereo.com. Here with an exciting guest tonight, and as always, my co-host, Mr. HiFiVega. How you doing, Mr. Vega?
Doing great tonight. Ready to get it started.
I can feel the excitement in you, even though you're not expressing it in your actions. The Ben Stein of car audio is here, and that's Mr. Vega, to everybody who doesn't know. We have Mr. Wayne Harris. How you doing tonight, Wayne?
I'm good. How about yourself?
Doing very good. Thank you for joining us. Wow, this is a very exciting episode for a lot of us here, and thanks to everybody who's tuning in live, youtube.com/12vtalk. This will also be available as an audio podcast afterwards, so you guys can listen to it on your way to work. Let your wife listen to it on the way, because she knows she likes to listen to us as well. But we're going to have fun tonight and talk to Mr. Harris and ask him some questions. So Wayne, first off, we're going to start, and I know you have a huge history in car audio, but we do kind of want to know, maybe what got you started in car audio? What are your roots? Kind of what got you interested in car audio?
Well, I've always loved music, and I've always been involved with electronics as long as I can remember. I guess, when I was a little kid, maybe 5 years old, I would go hang out at one of the neighbors' house, and he was a ham radio operator. And for some reason or another, I was just fascinated with him talking on the radio and building equipment. He actually taught me how to solder at 5 years old. And I think that kind of cemented my interest in electronics. When I hear stories from my family, it kind of varies. But the underlying theme is when I was a kid, I would tear apart just about anything I could get my hands on. And my mom and my aunt said that, they'd bring home old toaster ovens or whatever, and I'd get to tear them apart. Of course, when I'd put it back together, it'd never work again. And it took a long time to get to that point where I could reassemble something that would actually work. But, I've always been interested in electronics, and I've always loved music, and I still love music. And I also believe that I'm an entrepreneur. So what I've done, or what I've been able to do, is take all of the things that are important to me, all of the things that I love to do, and put them together in such a way that I get to do what I want to do all the time. And I can't believe I have the best job in the world. I was able to take my skills in electronics and my love of music and cars and put all of that together and come up with some really cool stuff. So just a little bit of a background, kids these days are in an entirely different dimension. I have 2 teens, by the way, great kids, but they're either always on their phone or they're always playing Xbox or Fortnite or whatever it is. I grew up in Marfa, Texas, and you guys should probably Google that sometime, because Have you ever seen those maps of the United States where you see all the city lights at night? Well, you find the darkest, deepest black hole in the country, and that's where Marfa is. It's in West Texas. We had one flashing yellow light. We didn't get any FM radio. We only got AM, but most of that came out of Mexico. So if you wanted something to do, you had to use your imagination. And I think it really, it gave me the nudge to always be pushing the envelope. And, I could tell you stories all night. I remember, when I was 14, my parents actually our house was really small, but there was this small, I would say it was a house. Think of it more like a man cave, demilitarized, old rundown house out behind our primary residence. And they moved me out there, which was incredibly opportunistic. I mean, it was a great thing for me. And I took the kitchen area and I converted that into my lab. I had a dark room and I did chemistry experiments in there and also did my electronics. As I got a little bit older, and my friends all started getting cars, once again, we were really into stereos. As an entrepreneur, I was the official DJ, so I would always bring my stereo equipment and do dances after the football games. But we always had a problem because in those days, there weren't CDs and we didn't get FM radio. Now we did have some cassettes. That was right at the end of the 8-track era. So I remember when I was probably a sophomore or junior, I built an FM stereo transmitter, completely illegal. I mean, but I was a teenager and I'd put on a reel-to-reel tape and we'd drive around town, take about 6 minutes to do the whole town and listen to music. And that's the kind of stuff that I did as a kid. So I know I'm rambling a lot about this, but once I got to college, things they really started to take off for me. So I don't know where you want to head next, but that's kind of in a nutshell my background as a kid.
So what was your first car stereo system?
Well, I didn't have a car until I was a senior. I rode a dirt bike around. Marfa, it's one of these places where it's kind of like, first of all, everybody knew everybody. And my dad was a border patrolman. And if you got in trouble there, if the sheriff or anybody pulled you over, they weren't going to get you. You weren't going to get in trouble from them. They'd just tell your dad or your mom. And then that's where the trouble began. My mom finally, without my consent, she bought me a 1970 Chevy Nova, and it had like 170,000 miles on it. I mean, it was a beater, but she felt that I think she paid $700 for it, and she kind of felt that I needed a car instead of a motorcycle. But my first system in that vehicle, I think I had these speakers. I think they were called Tenna Mind Blowers or something. Have you ever heard of those Tenna Mind Blowers? They were like amplified 6x9s. They had some kind of amp in them. I don't remember the specifics of it. And then I have like a Craig or, boy, you're really asking me some tough questions. I later got a Pioneer cassette super tuner, but the system was definitely not, in fact, my focus wasn't really on car stereo at that time. I was more into, I had a Sansui 9090 receiver, which I would give anything to have back at this point. I think they're selling for like $1,500, $2,000 on eBay right now. And so I wasn't really into the car audio at that particular point. I guess the turning point when I first got interested in really wanted to do a system, it was probably around 1979, and my brother was giving me a ride from somewhere in his truck, and he had just put in these Cerwin-Vega 6x9s. Remember the ones that had the circuit breaker on them you could push in there? And this song Lunatic Fringe came on. I remember this. So Lunatic Fringe came on. I was like, man, that's awesome. And so at that point, I decided that I could do something and put something big in my car. And that's kind of like the nudge that set me in gear to building my first big system, which was the Eruption vehicle, the Regal.
Yeah, and I have some pictures here for those who are watching live. I'm going to actually show the Regal so that we can see it a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit about what when Wayne says that he went all in, he really went all in with this one. So it had, let's see, it was one of the first capacitor banks, according to this. You built this way back in the day before anybody heard of super caps or anything like that. It was the first national level competition winner, and you actually won a 1985 Chevy S10 truck in that competition. Is that correct?
Not exactly. So the story behind Eruption, this was a Regal. My mom bought me this while I was in college. I was an electrical engineering student at the University of Texas at Arlington. And back in those days, you could not buy high performance car audio. That industry had not been developed yet. There were only a few startup companies that were beginning to make high performance products. So like you couldn't buy a 12-inch subwoofer for a car. You couldn't buy 15-inch. You couldn't buy a CD player. You couldn't buy anything like that. The only company, there were only a couple of companies like Rockford, Fosgate was just getting started. And Zapco also was out there. There were some companies, some of the Japanese companies, but they didn't make what we would consider today to be high performance car audio. So what I ended up doing is I removed the seat in the Regal, and then I used a bunch of home audio equipment. I used Pro Sound subwoofers, like I had two JBL 15-inch subs, and that was in a vented box. And then there were some mid-range horns and tweeters that I put in the vehicle. But at that time, I didn't know that there was such a thing as competition. I was doing this as what we consider to be a demo vehicle. So you know how guys now, before cell phones, when people used to socialize in real person, we would go hang out somewhere and open up the doors to the car and put on the radio or some other type of music and let it rail. And it was some of the best times ever. And this was in the early 80s when this was taking place. The Regal had some really, looking at these pictures, a lot of times it's like looking at baby pictures of yourselves. On the one hand, it's like kind of embarrassing because when you look at the quality of workmanship and stuff like that compared to what installers do today, I mean, this was nothing. But it had some technical innovations. You kind of alluded to what we're looking at right there, that brown section there with the LEDs on it. That is the control panel for the capacitor bank. So I had taken 63 23,000 electrolytic capacitors and made this big electrolytic capacitor bank. You couldn't buy a 1 farad cap back then. They didn't make stuff like that. And anyway, what this would do, you would flick one switch and it would pre-charge those capacitors slowly through like a 10-watt resistor. And then you'd put it online so that there was relays in the back, contactors that would actually switch that cap bank in. And it made a huge difference. What you're not seeing, and I don't know if there's pictures of this, but the vehicle also had bus bars for power distribution. Some of these pictures are not how the system ultimately ended up. But underneath that home audio equipment, there were these plexiglass panels that covered all of the electrical distribution down below and passive crossover networks. Now, in the back of the vehicle, I had an original Rockford Fosgate BiPolar 650 amplifier. And that's another one of those things that I could just kick myself for getting rid of it. that amp, you know, when I was at Rockford, John France, at the time was the engineer there, and he told me they only made 50 of those bipolar amps, and they all either broke or they all got recalled. And so Rockford actually, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but eventually I swapped out that amp for a 650 MOSFET. They sent me a MOSFET, and I just don't think it ever played near as strong as the bipolar. Now, a funny thing about that bipolar amp, when I say bipolar, that just means that it uses traditional transistors like a NPN and PNP transistors. But that type of amplifier topology, it has emitter resistors, and they get really hot because the transistors are not perfect, so you have to have this resistor in there. Well, I'd be wailing on my system, and I had the amp mounted to the subwoofer enclosure, and so the vibration, those resistors would get so hot, and the vibration would sling the resistors off of the PC board. It would literally melt the solder, and they'd come off. And so I had a paper bag full of spare parts, resistors and transistors and stuff. And I got to tell you, I looked all day for that bag. I still have it somewhere. But, you know, the system would start sounding distorted, and I'd crack open the amplifier and solder the parts all back in. And within 30 minutes, I was good to go, and we're going again. So some good memories with that. I do wish that I had that amp back because it had a lot of sentimental value. It was my first big amp. Now, with regards to the competition, if you want me to go into that, so here's the thing. You know, I've had a real fortunate career, and I believe I've just been surrounded by the brightest people ever. And there are people, if you look back at things that happen, there's always little, you know, forks in the road. And when I was in college, you know, I was just demoing my vehicle, and somebody said they had heard of a car stereo contest in San Angelo, Texas. And I couldn't believe that something like that actually existed. And it's about a 4-hour drive for me. And so I went down there. It was my first car stereo contest. And that's the first time that I met George Reed, aka Doc Thunder, Rolling Thunder. He was he's the first person that I know of that actually were doing these sound off contests. So without him doing that, and without his commitment and encouragement, I didn't win that first contest, by the way. I came in, I don't remember what place I got, second or third, but he really encouraged me to stay involved and to keep competing. And he would always let me know when shows were taking place around Texas. And I started becoming a regular and traveling to all of those shows. So, you know, George was definitely interested. He's a friend of mine, and I am grateful that he did the things he did back in the day. Doing these shows, I think, was setting the stage for what has actually become a huge multi-billion-dollar industry that everyone gets to enjoy today. Anyway, long story short, I competed all of 1984, the summer of 84. And then there was it was billed as the first national level competition. We would call it World Finals these days. It was at the Astrodome in Houston. And so I went over there, and I saw some, you know, this was the infancy of car audio from a competition perspective. And I saw some incredible vehicles there, and I did not think that I was going to win that contest. But I ended up somehow winning first place. And so I got to make sure Celise isn't looking. Celise threw away all of my trophies from that era. But I have this one. I don't know if you guys can see this. This one is the trophy that I won at that national championship in 1984. And I won a check for $5,000, which I used to pay off my debt at Stereo Dallas, because I had been buying equipment. I'd been using my credit cards to buy equipment to compete, and I had accrued a sizable debt, and so I was able to take that $5,000 and pay off my debt. Now, one thing else I want to show you, because when I was looking through my junk today, I found my original notebook for the Regal. And this has all of the wiring diagrams and the subwoofer enclosure design calculations. The reason I want to show you this is at that show, I met one of the judges there was Dave Navone. Now, I don't know, you guys know Dave Navone. He eventually later on formed a relationship with Richard Clark. They started Auto Sound 2000. Really great guys, incredibly knowledgeable, huge contributors to car audio, and also good friends of mine now. But back then, I didn't know who he was. But he always mentioned that he was really impressed that I had that book. And it was probably one of the little things that helped me to win that competition. So that was a good experience for me. It also really helped to launch my career because the place I was buying my stereo equipment from was a store in a chain of specialty car audio stores in Dallas-Fort Worth called Stereo Dallas. Now, Stereo Dallas had 7 stores, and I'd been buying my equipment there, and when they found out that I had won, they wanted to have me at their store every weekend. But I was too busy to do that. First of all, I had a full-time job, plus I was going to college as an engineering student, and I was almost finished with school at the time. And one day I went into the store, and the owner, I can't remember his name was Earl. He's like, Wayne, what would it take for you to go to work for us? And, you know, I was a kid, and I was like, you buy me a new fire engine red Corvette and I'll start tomorrow. And he leaned back and put his hands behind his head, and he started laughing, and he stood up and shook my hand, and he says, okay. And so the very next day we went down and bought a new Corvette. And so I was on board. And, you know, the crazy thing was my only responsibility is I just had to show up at their stores and demo my vehicle. I had to be there on a Saturday or whenever it was. They had special events taking place. So that was really, they used that video of the vehicle, me winning and stuff, and all of the movie cinema theaters, and showing, you know, that saying that they were the sponsor of the national champion. So they were using it from a marketing perspective. So, boy, there's a lot of cool stuff that happened then. And you know, I don't want to diverge too much. I had, this was before cell phones, and I did a lot of cruising with that car. It was really ironic. Before I took the job with Stereo Dallas, during the day, my day job, I fixed police radios, the walkie-talkies. And so the police officers would come in there all day long. We're all friends. And then as soon as it's Friday night, I'd be out there cruising. And now it's like I got tickets for everything you can possibly think of, because police don't like when kids congregate, there's usually trouble. And whenever you demo a vehicle, it causes a huge congregation of people. And so instead of getting all the kids, they would go after the person that's causing the problem. But anyway, it was kind of interesting. Like the coyote and the sheepdog, you know, we would be friends during the day, and then we'd be kind of like mortal enemies in the evening. But anyway, before I move on, did you have any more questions about Eruption, the Regal?
No, I think you covered it very well, Rob. Unless you have any other questions.
So, Eruption was a direct response to your brother's Sherwin Vegas 6x9s.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And by the way, so Eruption, I named the car Eruption because I have always loved Van Halen. I actually have an autographed guitar of Van Halen. I have it's got a shadow box. It has my original LP that I wore out, literally, embedded in there, along with the guitar, the David Lee Roth Van Halen. And they have a song called Eruption. And so that's what I named my car for. And I had these Van Halen emblems on the side of the car. So yeah, that's where that name came from.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I didn't really become aware of your builds until the hearse. And I think maybe that's where we're wanting to go. I mean,
Sure.
that to me, that thing was just incredible. So you can tell us all about it.
Okay, so when I was working at Stereo Dallas, I had won the championship in 1984, and there was another championship event coming up in 1985, and it was at the I can't really think. It was at the Cotton Bowl in Dallas, and so I needed to do something to raise the bar, to take it to the next level. Big is not big enough, and I wanted to. I felt that I'd pretty much done everything I could with the Regal. There's only so much room in there, but I didn't have a lot of money. So I was always thinking, what could I do to, what could I build? And I was driving somewhere out in a rural area of Texas, and I looked out in this field and I saw a hearse. It's a 1960, so it has the fins on it. And I was just thinking, wow, that would be so cool. And it has so much space. I ended up buying the car for $800. It'd been sitting there for so long that it had sunk into the dirt until, I mean, it was literally sitting on the ground. It was flush with the earth. It took about 3 days to get it roadworthy. It was actually in pretty good shape, and the inside was in really good shape, and the engine and transmission were in great shape. It just needed new tires and belts and hoses and that kind of stuff. So I bought the car for $800. And since I was working at Stereo Dallas, I had access to their install bays. And so I enlisted the aid of several of some of the installers there, and we erected a privacy wall. And in the middle of the night, I moved the car in there, and it was off limit. Nobody knew what was in there, only me and 2 other people. The owner would come over, and he's like always trying to get to peek inside, and we wouldn't let him. And it was my secret project building up for this national championship at the Cotton Bowl. So I'd stripped out the car. I've always been influenced by like James Bond movies and all of the cool cars that he has, like in The Spy Who Loved Me. His car, that Lotus, it turns into a submarine. The dashboard flips over. I also like airplanes. I'm a pilot. I wasn't a pilot back then, but I've always been fascinated with airplanes. And so I completely gutted the car. Give me a second to think about this, because I built this car in multiple facets. The first one was extremely crude. It had a kind of a cockpit, but it was really pretty crude. And that's the one that has the 30-inch subwoofer in it, the EV30. So yeah, here's some pictures of the construction. This is the second one, the second phase. The first one that had the 30-inch woofer in it, it had a Electro Voice 30-inch sub. It had 8 12-inch mid-bass drivers. It had 4 12-inch mids, and it had 8 Electro Voice horn mids, and then it had 16 T35 EV tweeters facing straight down from the roof. And that thing was cool. There's some old school video I have some DB Drag USA old school videos of this car playing. That 30-inch looked really cool, but it didn't handle very much power. It only had a 2-inch voice coil. The cone itself was made out of styrofoam, just like a styrofoam cup. And I blew it several times, and I actually eventually had a complete cone separation where the voice coil literally broke physically all the way through the cone. So it looked cool, but it never was a really massive performer. I had it in a 50 cubic foot vented enclosure. I don't remember what my tuning frequency was, but I know my 3 dB down point was 18 hertz. So in order to play those really low frequencies, I had to incorporate a DBX subsonic synthesizer. So what it does is it takes whatever the fundamental frequencies are, bass frequencies, and it recreates them 1 octave lower. So if you have 40 hertz, it'll create a new frequency that's 20 hertz. And that really made a difference. So that car, I believe the original one had 4 of the Rockford Fosgate Power 650 MOSFETs. And hard for me to remember all of the specifics of that car. It had a Sony CDX5 or CD5. About that time, that's when Sony came out with the first CD player for cars. And they were really expensive back then. They were also weren't very good. So if you played anything with a lot of bass, if there's any vibration, the CD would skip. And I had mine, to make matters worse, I had mine mounted on like a 30-degree angle in the center console. And so it was always giving me a hard time. Other things that were interesting about that car.
I think I got a little picture there, Wayne, of the Sony. Those who are listening to the podcast, sorry, you're going to have to go check out YouTube to see this. But Wayne, we'll link below in the video description to the videos, because you do have several old school videos on your DB Drag USA channel. We'll make sure that people get a link to those and go back and watch them, because this is really cool retro stuff here.
Above that CD, these pictures really helped me, because, this was a 25, 30 years ago. This is 1985. So it was a long time ago. And, but looking at that picture, it makes me remember that I had digital thermometers I had a digital thermometer that I had fabricated, and it had temperature sensors in each of the amplifiers, and it would cycle through each amplifier showing me the temperature and the voltage for that particular amp. So I could see, if it was getting too hot or not. It looks like in that picture, I'm controlling a Z preamp. So the Rockford Fosgate amps, there was what we called a Z preamplifier. It had a little 5-band EQ on it. Okay, so it looks like there's 4 of them there, and that makes sense because I had 4 of those 650 amplifiers. The car had 2 Les-Tech alternators, and then, I had that capacitor bank in the back, and I had, I want to say, in this particular car, maybe 4 batteries, but I'm not absolutely sure about that. So it was work in progress when you see it at that point compared to where it ends up, where it is right now. So in that was the first iteration of the Hearse. That was when I was still basically self-employed. I was working at Stereo Dallas, but I ended up winning a Chevy S10 at that competition. And once again, I sold the Chevy S10 for $6,500, and then I used that money to pay off all of my debt. But the thing that was cool about that show, so you can tell from the product I was using that I was a huge Rockford fan. Rockford was a tiny company. They only had a handful of employees at the time. But at that show, John France, who was the chief engineer at Rockford, he came down and presented me with a special award. And I told him, I was wanting to get a job for Rockford. And he basically said, the company's really small and they're not hiring. But there was another company there, Orion Industries. And Orion Industries was a real fledgling startup high-performance car audio company at the time. They ended up offering me a job as an engineering assistant. And their chief engineer, Mark Busser, which if he's ever around, I want to thank you, Mark, for giving me that opportunity. Again, this is one of those decisions where I pretty much threw everything in. It was all in to pick up my life and move from Dallas Fort Worth to Tempe, Arizona. And I went to work for Orion. Of course, they wanted me to change out all of my equipment. So I had to change out my equipment, and I was using Orion products at the time. But that was an incredible experience for me. I was only at Orion for about 2 years, but the people I was working with at the time, in fact, my whole career, I've been surrounded by the brightest minds, in my opinion. They're all alpha personalities, incredibly smart, incredibly creative. And when you get a bunch of creative people together, it makes you better than you would be by yourself. And so when I was at Orion, man, I was definitely second guessing myself because it was really small, literally like an install bay. And the board meetings, the corporate meetings had maybe 5-6 people there. And Bernie Bolin was one of them, and Sam Taylor was one of them. Those guys, both of them are super smart, but they're both convinced that they're right. And, Sam's imposing and big, and Bernie's smaller, but he's got this strong willpower, and they would be going at it, arguing. And I felt like hiding under the table half the time. But at the end of the day, we're innovating like crazy, coming out with products. I got to design products from the get-go, which I would have never had that kind of opportunity. In fact, I don't know how somebody would have an opportunity like that these days, where you have to have a PhD. The technology today is so advanced that somebody like myself back then would have never had that opportunity. But it was great times. That was, I think I went to work for them in 1986. This is when the real car audio competition movement started, in my opinion. George was doing it good, but on a local level, mostly in Texas, a little bit in Oklahoma. In Tempe, you had Orion, you had Rockford Fosgate, you had Lloyd Ivy, MTX, you had Jeff Schoon at Precision Power. Those 4 people right there, who were both, they were all fledgling companies, but they all had a vested interest in the growth of aftermarket 12 volt. And they all felt that these car stereo contests would be good for their business. And contests were taking place, but the rules for those contests were all over the map. The judging criteria was all over the map. Nothing was coordinated. So we formed this alliance, and the plan was we were going to do 8 shows across the country. And I think it was called NACA, but it may have been called something before NACA. And when we were talking about the various rules and stuff, I said I would do the SPL stuff because it's objective. And as part of that, I built this 16-foot light tree that would show people how loud their sound systems were. I also wrote a lot of the rules that are still in use, actually, in some of the IASCA. It's changed a lot, but if you look at RTA scoring and stuff like that, a lot of those things go back to those days. We ended up doing those shows, and we would have board meetings. Usually they were in Los Angeles. I think they were at Kenwood or Pioneer. I can't remember where, but that's where I met Ron Trout. So you old schoolers will know Ron. Ron was best man in my wedding, by the way, but I didn't know him back then. He's probably the smartest guy I ever met. He's one of these people that he just can come up with ideas. We would go to lunch. People would accuse Ron and I. We'd go to lunch at Rockford, and they'd say, "Man, you guys go to lunch and you keep us busy for a year." We had this ability to play off of each other. I knew the technical aspects, and he had this creative vision, and it was real synergistic. But every time I'd see him, he's like, "Why are you working at Orion? They're lame. You need to come to work for Rockford." I said, "Man, I tried to go to work for you guys. You wouldn't hire me." He's like, "You need to come to work for us." And he just go on. And after about a year of this, he offered me a job at Perfect Interface, which is the accessory division at Rockford. So that was a scary move for me, but it got my foot in the door at Rockford. I was working for Ron directly, doing engineering work there. And that's one of those moves that just opened up a huge opportunity for me. Now, Rockford at this point was growing. This was around 1989. I was there. Eventually, I was director of R&D at Rockford, but I was at Rockford for 13 years. And those are some of the best times. I had some of my lifelong friends were made at Rockford. That company had, and the people that worked there were all so professional and so intelligent. It was just a whole nother level. And I think I couldn't even begin to tell you how many skills that I learned there. Everything from time management to the 7 Habits of Highly Effective Managers, the Stephen Covey stuff. But more than that for me, that what was awesome is being around smart people and going to these meetings and brainstorming. We had these brainstorming sessions, getting to design products, and then literally walk out the door of my lab and see those products being manufactured right on the production line, right there in the facility. That was just incredible. So you learn everything. It's not one dimensional, it's 3-dimensional. You're learning about everything from conceptualizing a product to designing the product to taking care of the bill of materials, the sheet metal, distribution, inventory, the manufacturing processes, the testing, everything, every aspect. The company was big enough to learn all of these things, but small enough that I was able to get my hands dirty with just about all of the different things going on in the company. So, anyway, I designed a lot of products at Rockford. I redid the.
I'm sorry. If you don't mind, I'll bring up the screen here and show people the Symmetry, which is one of the patents that you obtained. I take it with Rockford, the Symmetry system, which was the modular amplifier / signal processor, a lot of other things. Do you want to talk a little bit about the Symmetry system?
Symmetry was an evolutionary idea of mine, and most of my ideas start out as napkin drawings or as a means to solve a problem that I've encountered doing my own system. So, one of the things in the Terminator, that I always felt was a challenge is you have all these individual discrete components and then you have to hook them all together. I was, this was in the beginning of computers also, but in the computer realm, you could buy a PC and then you could expand the functionality of the PC by putting plug-in peripheral cards like a video card or a sound card. And I thought, man, it would sure be cool to have some kind of similar approach, but for audio products. And that's when I came up with the Symmetry product. Symmetry is a computer-controlled audio control system. So there's a microcontroller, and then it has a remote control. And depending on what peripherals you plug in, there was a preamp module. There were 2 different types of EQs. There was a 14-band EQ and a 28-band 1/3 octave EQ. There was a 16-channel crossover, which is probably one of the most powerful crossovers I've ever seen. It gave you complete control over levels and the crossover corner frequencies. And then there was a DSP module, which was an amazing product also. And I did, for people that are not familiar, while I was rooting around in the garage, I actually found one. So for people that have never seen one, it's a housing. It has a plexiglass door that opens up. And then inside of there, you have these various cards. So like I don't know if you can see that, but this card here that I'm pulling out is a digital output module. I'm not going to pull all of these out, but the cool thing about it is when you'd plug the cards in, they would make the correct connections on the back, so you didn't have to run any wires. And then on the back, there was a bunch of connectors that you would use to connect to peripherals. Like, for instance, one of the problems in cars is noise. And, you know, I realized that to maximize signal to noise ratio, you need to have a line driver as close to the source unit as possible. And ideally, it's a balanced output so that any noise that might be injected into the cabling cancels itself out because of the differential aspects of the input of the preamp. So this unit used what's called we called it the MLT, or missing link transmitter. And I don't have one here, but it's a little box. It had 4 different stereo inputs on it. And then it had one of those big cables that connects to the back of this box. And that missing link transmitter would take the low level single ended output from your source unit, convert it into a very high voltage differentially driven output that then fed into the Symmetry box. Symmetry was definitely way ahead of its time. I was looking at some of these boards. It looks like I always put my initials on all of the products that I design. If you ever look at any of the products I've designed, on there it'll say like WH. This one says WH90. So that means this was done in 1990. I'm not exactly sure when Symmetry came out. It was like 1991 possibly. Rockford was just transitioning into surface mount technology at the time. And this was actually one of the very first products where we were incorporating surface mount technology. SMT it's science, but it also requires an art. And if you don't do it right, like for instance, if you don't preheat the boards correctly before the reflow process, then you don't get a good solder connection. And we would have problems. I remember taking some of these cards and whacking them on the table and all the parts flying off of them. So we had that as a challenge. It was a good learning experience for the company, but it was really a challenge for me to deal with that because, you know, I felt like my product wasn't being manufactured the way it should. But also the unit was kind of sophisticated, and installers at the time had not, a lot of them, remember, I was looking at at that time, about 15% of households had a computer. So a large number of people didn't have computers, and the installers had not been trained with this type of technology. And so, you know, it was a challenge conveying all that information. But some good things came out of Symmetry. And by the way, there's another box. I'll show you.
And Wayne, do you recall about how much the Symmetry was back then? Was it around 2,000 or was it less?
It was expensive. I don't remember. And it depends on what those peripheral cards, you know, back in those days, I had a rule of 5. So, well, if I spent $100, my BOM was $100 and we sold it for $200 and the dealer sold it for $400 and the rep got a commission in there. So there were big commissions back in those days, you know. And so people like that, the amplifiers, you know, 650 watt amp or a Power 1000 would be like $2,200. Nowadays you can buy an amp like that for not much. And that first housing I showed you was the CSV, and I can't remember what that stands for. And then this is the ASV. I know the C stands for controller, I guess, and A stands for amplifier. This was really cool. This would hold up to four channel amp modules. So you could have like a 16 channel system, or you could bridge the channels. And this was really cool because it has an integrated fan and a single point of power that goes in there. But this thing here, each one of those amps was expensive. They weren't really powerful. But you know, they were audiophile, and so we sold some of these. I know there's still some of them out there. I have a couple. Typically at Rockford, whenever I would design something, I would get the first 5 pieces off of the line. That was the deal. And I don't know where. I definitely don't have 5 of everything anymore, but I do have some things. So Symmetry was way ahead of its time, in my opinion. It took a long time for some of the products to do what it did back then. And the crossover I mentioned was incredibly powerful. And I want to show you one other thing too. This is how the modules are sold. They were sold like this is the 1/3 octave equalizer. So if somebody wanted to add a 1/3 octave EQ to their system, it would come in these little boxes like this, or a crossover or DSP or whatever. They were all packaged up real nice and neat like that. The Symmetry, one thing that it did do for Rockford, it got a lot of press, a lot of international press. And sometimes the press would even be comparing our company against big giants like Sony. Sony came out with a product. I can't remember the name of it. They came out with a product around the same time as Symmetry. And Symmetry actually did more things and was more flexible than that Sony product. So it really, really put us on the map as a technological powerhouse, you know, a leader. And Rockford used that to great advantage, you know, when they were marketing the company as a product innovator.
Yeah, there's a real good link. Sorry, Rob, and we'll put in the video description that'll take it to your Term Pro page, where you actually have the article from Auto Sound and Security from 1991, and it talks about the accolades and everything of the Symmetry system. It's a very cool article for those who haven't seen it. Rob, go ahead.
So, you know, I could kind of see having you tell the story, the seed of the Symmetry in the first build, in Eruption. You know, in my opinion, that was very advanced back then, and it just seemed like it progressed from there to the Hearse until you actually got to build the thing that you wanted back then. That's very cool.
Thanks. Yeah, you know, I think one of the advantages I had, I mean, other than being around all these really wonderful people, is, you know, when you have experience, you could talk about using a table saw or doing whatever all you want, but until you actually go out there and try it and use it and get familiar with it, or doing any kind of hands-on stuff, you can't appreciate the little things that need to happen. And Symmetry was kind of like the things that I wish, you know, when I was building the Terminator, I was thinking, man, I wish I could do this. I wish I could do that. I wish I had a thing that did this. And so I incorporated a lot of those concepts into that product. It was really fun today digging around through these boxes. I have all of my original notes and sketches. I found this one sketch, and this is from like 1990, and it shows a car, you know, and you pull up to your driveway, and it establishes a connection to your house, and then it will sync the music with your house. Now, this is way before cell phones and way before, I mean, the internet. Term Pro didn't even go online. We went online in 1996, a long time ago, but this drawing was before that. I mean, the internet was still really in its infancy. And so there's a lot of conceptual things that were coming out. Some of them like that, you know, I never really pursued it. I wish, you know, I'd be like, you know, Mark Zuckerberg or something if I'd done some of those things. But the thing is, you know, having a sandbox and the luxury to create ideas and then build products and test them out. That was something that, is just priceless. And the company, Rockford didn't care when I came in. I mean, I worked a lot of hours, but they didn't care when I came in. They didn't ask any questions. I answered directly to the president of the company. As long as I delivered the goods, they were happy as could be. And it was a good time. I made good friends there, and not just at Rockford, but in the industry. That was the heyday. That was a really good time for 12 volt. Around 1992 to 1994 was when it was really, really strong.
Yeah,
so
I agree. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I was a young teen in that time, and it was, of course, I look back on it now as like, this is the coolest thing, talking with you during the time when I was so interested in car audio and, getting used to it and learning how it worked, and then hearing all these behind the scenes stories of how everything kind of started with you and then how the products got developed at Rockford. I mean, it really was a cool time to be involved. I think you're very fortunate to be involved at the time that you were, and it's awesome to hear all these stories.
Well, thanks. There was some really positive things that came out of Symmetry. Before I talk about those, I want to, before I forget, I forgot to mention some things about the Terminator, the hearse, that I thought were really, really cool. So there are some videos online, some of the videos now that show the car as it actually is. I haven't made any changes to it since 1996. I still own the car. I keep it in a hangar. My wife doesn't know where it is because she sells all my toys. Actually, Celise, I've been married for 22 years. My wife is awesome. She is really my partner. If you've ever seen Iron Man, she's my pepper. Without her, I wouldn't even, I get places on these international trips. I don't even know where I'm going. And I just open my folder, and okay, I need to go here, here, and here. So she really adds structure to my world. And she was actually the art director at Rockford. So she's probably going to sue me for sexual harassment or something like that, because these days, you know how it is. But if it wouldn't have been, and someday, we have to get her story because she tells it really funny. But she was art director. I was director of R&D. And when the company went public, and I just had my son had just been born. We decided to step away and focus exclusively on my business. And we left on good terms, and I still have good friends at Rockford. When I left Rockford, there were 650 employees there. And so it was cool. But anyway, what I was going to tell you, the Terminator, it has some really amazing things in it. It has, it has a rear view camera. It has a VCR in it with a screen in the dash. It has an Apple II computer on board and with analog to digital converters. And I wrote a program that monitors the temperature of all the amplifiers and the speed of all the fans for the Power 1000. Yeah, that's the picture I'm talking about right there. So in the center console, the top screen is the Apple computer display, and the video display is directly below that. On the left-hand side, on the driver's side, there were 3 screens. One of them, the top right, was also the computer. The center was an ETAC navigator. This is before GPS. So an ETAC navigator was a vector-based, you can think of like the old Asteroid video games, is a vector-based navigation system, and it used an electronic compass and dead reckoning. So there were these little sensors on the wheels, and it would correlate that with a map, with map data. And so it was kind of accurate, but it was way cool. I thought it was super cool. And then the top left, that was my rear view camera. There's a steering wheel or a control wheel out of a Beech King Air airplane. And I took in the center, it has an Escort radar detector. I took the Escort out of its housing and built the controls for it into that control wheel. The buttons up at the top are used to turn the amps on and off. Each person in the vehicle had their own left and right, mid-range, and tweeter. So when you're sitting, those seats are Recaros, and when you sit in there, you would have your own left and right speakers, and they were, above your head and out front. There were also speakers in the headrest of those Recaros to add rear fill. This car had the 3 24-inch subs, 8 12-inch mid-bass drivers, and it had 6 Rockford Fosgate Power 1000 amps on the amp rack. The amp rack would rotate. So on one side of the amp rack, it has the Power 1000s, and on the other side of the amp, it has all of the crossover networks and signal distribution. There's another thing that's really, really cool. The side windows of the Terminator are like 40 inches wide and maybe 20 inches tall. And each side has a 10-band spectrum analyzer. And I used incandescent bulbs, so they look way cool. At night, they look really cool. So there's a huge box that has a bunch of transistors and bandpass filters. It took forever to fabricate that. The building, gluing all the little squares for the housings for each bulb, and there's 100 on each side of the car made out of foam core. But that thing is super cool, and I think that's also visible in that there's a video online. It's World of Wheels video. You will be able to see the spectrum analyzers in action. There's a cool story if you want to hear it about the Power 1000s. So the Power 1000 at the time was black, and it had a caboose on the end, which was used to cover the entry points for the power cabling. I didn't have enough room to fit those 6 Power 1000s in my car. They were too long. So what I did is I took one and I machined off the sheet metal for the caboose, and then I was able to fit 6 in there. But it didn't have enough lights for me. I always have liked the LEDs and the Tokyo at night type of thing, especially as a cruiser. You're parked outside at night. In addition to the music, the lights were just really cool. So what I did is I designed my own LED module, and this is the original prototype for the Power 1000C. So those are the LEDs. This is the prototype board. My boards, if they were prototype, I'd put Rev 0. So this one I did in 1989, and I built 6 of those, and this is what they look like. This is kind of like show and tell. This is the Power 1000C shroud. Rockford actually, so what happened is Jerry Cave, who was one of the regional sales director at Rockford, he was also in my wedding, by the way, good friend of mine. But at the time, I didn't know him so well. He saw these in my car, and he was just like blown away. And he goes, "We need to change over to this." And because mine were all chrome plated and had the LEDs. And so they made the change, and that's how the product ended up selling from that point forward. We made 2 special edition runs in addition to the standard product. One of them was Wayne Harris series, which had my signature on it. And that's what this shroud is. And then they made another one that was called the Terminator edition. Those I think were like gold, and they were pre-order only and it was a Japanese distributor that bought like 50 of them. So anyway, that's a history of that. One thing I wanted to tell you, when I was cleaning out my garage, when I was looking through this stuff, I found 2 huge boxes of this 1988 publication from Installation News that has the Terminator on the front cover. So at the end, somehow, if somebody wants a free copy of this, they just need to send me a self-addressed, stamped envelope. I can probably send you the information. Maybe you could put it online and then they just mail that to me, and then I will stick one of these in the mail for them if they want it. It's kind of cool because it's so old. It's
you're going to get like
5,000
letters.
Well, I only have about 150.
I know.
So.
Yeah, you don't realize the old school audience here, but no, that's awesome. Yeah. That's very kind of you to offer that up. I have to say, during that time, the Power 1000, especially the one with the LEDs, the Power 1000C was like the dream amplifier. And these days, if you don't watch eBay and places like that and see, Wayne, those amps still go for a mint these days. People still want them. So they were very popular back then, kind of out of the reach of most people, because I think the retail price was like $2,600.
They were.
But but nowadays, a mint condition one could go for close to that much now. But they definitely lived up, and I've actually done some testing on my Power 1000. I've got one of the Terminator editions myself, and the power output on those things is just unbelievable. Even by the rating terms of those days, which 250 by 4 was big power. 500 by 2 bridged for subwoofers was huge, but we're getting 750, 800 watts per channel, at 1% distortion. So we're getting big numbers for a Class AB amp, and they really lived up to the hype, even for the people who, couldn't afford them back then that can grab one these days. Really awesome amplifiers.
Well, and they're substantial, and they're audiophile. I mean, they're a lot of the real powerful amps these days, they're for bass only. One thing I'll say about the way that things used to be, in the old days, power was expensive. And so people really had to pay attention to efficiency, system efficiency, everything from selecting the loudspeaker. Like originally, when I built the Eruption and the Terminator, originally I was using speakers, Pro Sound speakers made by JBL and Electro Voice. Edge wound voice coils. They were really low compliant speakers. They required a vented box, but they had sensitivity ratings of around 101 dB or 99 dB. So, but as time has gone by, people want smaller and smaller enclosures. Speakers become the compliance becomes bigger and bigger, and so we started throwing power at the system. So now, the speakers are incredibly inefficient for the most part. But we have almost unlimited amount of power, and power is cheap. You can get really high power amps for really not much money. But anyway, moving to the after Symmetry, that was one of those products that was way cool. We didn't sell a lot of them. It was really expensive, but all of the technology that I had developed in Symmetry, I was able to migrate down into a more everyday type of product that could be that was more affordable. So that was originally it was the EPX, and this is the prototype, the very first EPX. It doesn't even have any silk screening on it. This was the second prototype, has a little bit of silk screen on it. And then we had, I think this is probably the EPX. The EPX, it was a computer controlled preamp, and I can't remember actually, to be honest, what it did. But that product ended up becoming the EPX2, which is still in use, believe it or not. I get calls. I guess people have questions or problems. They call Rockford, and Rockford gives them my phone number. But these things are still out there. I know people still have them because they will send me emails and stuff. This was also modular. So it was a preamp. It had a modular, you could add equalization and a DSP, and it had a really powerful crossover network. This is what it looks like inside. So, you could buy these optional modules, and then they would sandwich together. And it had the LED bar graph meters because I want to put those on everything. And everything was controlled with this little clunky remote control. We called it the RDAT, for Remote Data Access Terminal. It was a two-way controller. It's backlit, kind of hokey, but it did the job. And it lets you set up your crossover points and adjust it in real time. I mean, it was really powerful. So EPX2 is a huge seller at Rockford, and that product, I think, was probably when I was at Rockford, that product sold more than any of the other products that I had designed while I was there.
That's awesome. Wow, I'm blown away up to this point. There's so much cool stuff I want to ask you, but I kind of feel like we need to maybe move on to some of the more current stuff. Talk about DB drag and why it started, and what's the deal with the pressure meter versus the microphone, and
sure,
anything like that you want to start with.
I've been involved with SPL for a long time. And if you remember, when I was talking about the very beginning of NACA, I elected to do SPL, the SPL portion of the competition, because it was objective. There was no subjectivity. One thing that always concerned me about some of the stuff that I'd seen at competition was in the subjective formats of competition, there can be a lot of drama. And as a person who makes a living with my ears. And by the way, I'm into SPL. You guys that know me, anytime you see me at a show, even if I'm not in the vehicles, I'm wearing hearing protection. I always wear earplugs, even if the SPL is never over 115, 120 dB. But I know that if I were to sit in cars all day long, my ability to differentiate between any two vehicles would be a real challenge. I know that you can undergo training, and I believe that there are judges that are capable of making good choices and differentiating. I just didn't feel that I was one of those people. I definitely can tell if a system sounds good, but I didn't want to be in a position where I have to choose who's better just based on my own gut. I would rather see it on the meter. But as we were doing shows around 1992 or 93, we were at a show in San Bernardino, California, and it was open to the public as a coliseum. And you could hear a pin drop. There was no excitement at all. It was just like if you were a spectator, you go in there and you wouldn't know anything was happening. It was so quiet. And so I was just thinking, this is not a way to entice people to come into 12 volt. It's because remember, I was a cruiser. I know what gets people interested. When I go park in a parking lot and turn up my system and demo my car, it would just be a flock of people. It's like a magnet. And so I felt that we needed to do something like that in the sound off community. I can't take credit for all of the things. Initially, in the beginning, there were other people that were really instrumental in helping create the concept of DB drag racing. Ron Trout, my really good friend, he was really involved. Ed D'Alessandro, who was a rep for Rockford Fosgate, he was really instrumental in coming up with some conceptualization. Paul Papadakis, Soundcrafters, who puts on Spring Break Nationals, a good friend of mine now. All of these people and others, there are others. I mean, I can't, I think that what I did, of course, I put my own spin on it also, but I took the ball and I ran with it. And that is what really my contribution was, is I drove the agenda. I pushed the format. And so starting in 1994, in the 90s like that, 94, 95, 96, 97, when we did our first DB drag racing event was like at Iasca, at the Iasca finals in Dallas, Fort Worth. I was the one that built that equipment and did if you look at the old videos, you'll see that I'm up there with my wife, Celise. We're out there doing it. But it took a long time. There weren't a lot of people willing to do it. And for the first few years, I was catering to 8 competitors, and think of it as an invitational, as an exhibition. So we would have a show and we would bring in those competitors and they would compete against each other. And so but in those days, it was formative in nature. So the rules were slowly evolving. People were showing interest. I think, if you look at our event calendar on Turn Pro, you can see events from like 95, 96, 97. There's like 4, 5, 6 shows a year. In 1998, I launched DB Drag Racing as an independent sound-off organization and set up judges and turnkey event promoters and reps in other countries. And that first year, we did over 500 shows. So now we've done over 18,000 shows. And as an organization, we are truly a global sound-off organization. There's a lot of companies that say they're international, but we have places, we're in like 42 countries. And just for instance, Russia did over 50 shows, and Ukraine, and everywhere they're doing it. So it kind of took off. Over the years, I've made good decisions and I've made bad decisions. I've learned some tough lessons. One time I made a change that impacted competitors' sound systems, and they would basically have to rebuild. And it really hurt us because those changes were so draconian that we lost some contestants and we had to recover that. So it's a good lesson though. And I learned. Right now, with regards to the sound equipment, initially we were using traditional microphones, and we'd use a mic calibrator and a piston phone calibrator. And it seemed like no matter what we would do, we could never keep the measurements identical. And that's critical in DB drag racing because it's a head-to-head format. So when somebody wins, you want them to win because their car is louder, not because there's a problem with the test equipment. Well, in 2001 at the DB drag racing finals, and I don't remember where it was, that was one of the most stressful times of my life. We'd take the microphones and we put them on the piston phone calibrator, get them set up identically. Some guy would burp his system, and then I put it back on the calibrator and it'd be off by 10 dB. And so it was so difficult. But everybody, the person coming in had the choice of lane. And so everybody basically had the same shot, but it definitely wasn't my idea of what an optimal sound off contest would be. So that sparked, I knew there had to be a better way. And after that show, I found a napkin drawing around, I don't know where I put it, but I sketched out my first design for an SPL sensor. So it doesn't use a microphone. I used a pressure sensor, and this is the first prototype of the SPL sensor. And this really changed everything because now with TermLab, we could get consistent, repeatable measurements, and the system didn't require calibration. And so now you have the ability to measure two cars at the same time, and the measurements are the same regardless of which lane you're in. That was in like 2002. The system actually won a CES gives out these design and engineering innovation awards, and it won an award for that. So I was really proud of that. Of course, as time has gone on, the product has evolved over the years. We currently we use the TermLab Magnum for SPL competition. And in fact, pretty much every sound off organization uses the Magnum. As far as I know, all of them use it. It is an incredible piece of equipment. It's a combination of hardware and software. I design all of the product. And by the way, my stuff is all made in the USA. So I could send this stuff overseas, but I've always been a proponent of made in USA. When I was at Rockford, all of our equipment was made in USA. Our subs were made in USA. Orion stuff was made in USA. And I want to make my stuff here. So I design the hardware, and then I send off the inventory, the raw components, and I have it made at a facility in Spokane, Washington. And so anyway, the quality of the product is really good. For people out there, the Term Labs never fail. There are people out there still using the original Term Lab systems from 15 years ago. So the equipment doesn't break. The PC boards are all made like with a military type of fabrication, and the sensors are encapsulated with an epoxy coating to prevent the vibration from fracturing the surface mount connections on the PC board. Now, in addition to making SPL measurements, the Magnum, so the sensors really changed everything. And I think it's been really great for the sound off community. Several years ago, after the introduction of the Magnum, we call it the Power Probe. And the Power Probe allows the judge to make true power measurements in real time. And this was another one of those things that I think has had a dramatic impact on sound off competition. When we first started doing sound offs years and years, decades ago, cars would sometimes be categorized by power, like 0 to 5,000 watts, 5,000 to 10,000 watts, etc. But what started happening is some of the manufacturers started giving their amplifiers ratings that were not actual true ratings in order to circumvent our classification system. So they might say, even at Orion, I remember being there when we developed the HCCA series. These were 400 watt amps, and we'd rate them at 25 watts. And so people would have an unfair advantage. So all of the sound off organizations quit looking at power. But with the introduction of the Power Probe, it completely levels the playing field, because now we don't care how much power a competitor has, as long as they don't exceed the power limit for a specific class, then they're allowed to compete in that class. And so, we had problems before where it would cost too much to compete and be a serious contender in DB drag racing, because people would have access to all these huge amps. But with the power limits, you don't have to spend so much. If you want to be in a 1,000 watt class, you can afford to do it.
Related to the Term Lab, one of the questions I had, and Rob, you can jump in here anytime, was related to kind of an all-in-one type system. Is there any thought of having it so you don't have to have a laptop? Is there any thought of having it just all together, kind of like your portable test system, no laptop required?
So that's a great question, and here's the answer to that. When I design products, if you remember with both Symmetry and the EPX2, I always want my systems to be upgradable, because when someone makes an investment in a system, instead of forcing them to throw it out and buy a whole new system, I want them to have the ability to add a peripheral, like a plug-in Power Probe or RTA mic or whatever it might be, or add features and functionality through software. So the Term Lab Magnum, when I designed that, it has a lot of hardware capability that is already in the box. So when people buy it, it's already in there. So with regard to your question, the Magnum has a Bluetooth transceiver on board. Okay. And so when the unit first came out, it just did basically SPL. The hardware's there, but the software that you run on the PC and the firmware in the box, those are field upgradable, and it's an automatic process. So each time I come out with a new version of the software, not only does it update the software on the PC, but sometimes it updates the firmware in the box. Soon, you'll be able to use your tablet, your cell phone, as the device to make measurements. So you won't need the PC. Now, the PC is always going to give you more capability than the phone, because like the people that are using the Magnum, a lot of times the judges, they have additional video displays, they have speech synthesis, we have network connectivity. I mean, they have a lot of stuff going on. We'll have 2 sensors, 2 probes, a lot of display information that has to go on. But the system was designed specifically with that ability to be able to use it with a cell phone. Now, the way that it would work, it actually works. I just haven't written an app to deploy. Initially it's going to be with Android. So that's going to be coming out. That's, here's why it kind of, let me just digress for a second. Initially, the Bluetooth was a real big idea for us. We wanted to make the app right away. But about the same time that the Magnum came out, Windows 10 came out. And all of a sudden now with Windows 10, you can I bought an HP Stream 7-inch Windows 10 PC for $69 at the Microsoft store. And it runs a full version of Windows. So it's so inexpensive, and it's a tablet that I put my developmental efforts elsewhere. That kind of bought us some time. But now that, we have the RTA mic fully operational, all the spectrum analysis capabilities, the power probe, the sensors, the full range sensors, all of that stuff is working really good. So now it's time to finish up and get some of the apps ready for the cell phone.
So I think where Derek was going with that is, some people don't realize how versatile the Magnum is. I mean, essentially, if you have some resistive loads, you've got an amp dyno,
That's right.
And that, as well as an RTA, as well as an SPL meter, and the value, in my opinion, is it's a crazy value for the amount of something you'd pay similar,
Thank you. And here's the thing. This is all on me. This is my fault. Celise is bugging me all the time. People are asking me all the time. We don't have a lot of documentation. We have articles on the website, but people don't read anymore. Based on my experience in the last few years, they want to see videos. I'm going to be doing some videos, because as much as people know about the Magnum, they don't even know the beginning of its capabilities. When you add the power probe, it adds over 90 additional types of measurements. Like if you want to see real-time impedance, or you want to see your box rise, or whatever it is. And the thing about the power measurements alone, it doesn't care about distortion. It doesn't care about the shape of the waveform. A lot of these, like the amp dynos or whatever, they require that you use a sine wave, that there's no distortion. That's because they're assuming that the waveform is sinusoidal. And so you can only, if you're using that type of model, if the waveform is not a sine wave, then your results are inaccurate. But the TermLab system, it's looking at the voltage waveform and the current waveform coming out of the speaker. It looks at the phase difference between those two, because you're not playing a resistive load in a car. You're usually driving an inductive load. So the current's lagging the voltage, and the amount of lag affects your true output power. The shape of the waveform affects your true power. Like a square wave has twice as much power as a sine wave. That in everything from how to use the RTA, most people don't even realize that the Magnum has a 1/4-inch tip ring sleeve jack right in the middle of that XLR connector. That's a high voltage input. So you could take the output of a source unit or an equalizer or a crossover, or the speaker output level of a OEM system, and you could measure the output voltage. You can measure the spectrum analysis. You can see if the factory is rolling off the highs or only putting out certain frequencies. The unit has a built-in signal generator, and it has a 1.5 watt amp. It has an in-series resistance that can be shunted with the relay. This is all built in the system, so that you can make the software is not done. This was something I was going to be working for CES. For those of you who may not be aware of this, We also sell an enclosure design program called Term Pro. And Term Pro uses a database of drivers. But with the Magnum, Term Pro shows, if you buy the option, it has a Term Pro menu selection where you can do enclosure design without leaving the software. But when I designed the Magnum, I designed all the hardware so you can make your own teal small parameter measurements so that you'll be able to, with your Magnum, measure the teal small parameters, push those right into Term Pro, and then design your subwoofer enclosure for your specific speaker. Because a lot of manufacturers, and I'm telling you right now, a lot of companies don't manufacture anything anymore. They don't. It's not like when I was at Rockford or Orion or back in the MTX days. By the way, I wanted to give a shout out to Lloyd Ivy, owner of MTX. He's a good friend of mine, and he was one of my first sponsors. I wouldn't be here without him, but so I just had to squeeze that in. But the thing is that people don't even, these companies, a lot of them don't even know what the teal small parameters are for their drivers. And when people design a subwoofer enclosure, you have to, if you're making an assumption, if your driver data is incorrect, then your box is not going to be right. And so, my vision is you're all in one tool. You have this device. You can make your own teal small parameter measurements. Then you can use Term Pro to design the box. You can test it. You can measure the impedance in real time. It also has a really awesome spectrum analyzer, so you can use it for all kinds of, and this is fully operational. So when you buy the Magnum, it includes a full 1/3 octave spectrum analyzer, has a built-in 48-volt phantom power supply. And so here's some things that are coming. I don't normally like to talk about things that haven't been developed because there's huge intellectual property theft going on. There are half a dozen SPL meters out there now that have copied a lot of the stuff that I invented, and the products are made in Russia. Of course, if you want to put Russian software in your PC, go for that. You're all be my guest. China, so my world, it used to bother me, but I just have to be first and make it best. And there's nothing I can do about the copycats. But where we're headed, two big things coming on the horizon. The first one is made for competitors. And I used to call it Winner's Edge. I'll come up with a cooler name than that. But what it is, you pull it up on the screen, and I have this on mine. You have 3 different parts. You have a window that has system profiles. So your system profile is like the vehicle, the type of equipment. It has information like your source unit and how many detents you have on the volume control, like 40 or however many. And you can have multiple profiles. So if you're an installer and you're working on multiple customers, or you have a team, each team can have their own profile. Then you have an environmental panel. The environmental panel uses geolocated information, weather information. So barometric pressure, temperature, altitude, and barometric pressure, if I didn't already say that. So you can manually type that in, or it will geolocate and pull down that information over the internet if you're connected to the network. And then finally, it has a database of measurements. So when you do a measurement, you click the save button and it saves it in the database. So when you get to a show, you see what the environmental conditions are. It will now tell you what the best frequency is for you to play and what the volume setting should be to achieve a certain sound pressure level. Because these sound systems are, especially as cars get, the more and more sophisticated the car, the more sensitive it is to just a single hertz. The difference in 50 and 51 hertz can make a 1 or 2 dB difference. And weather plays a big role there. And so now you're going to have an integrated database capability to incorporate environmental conditions on all of your measurements. That one's coming really soon for competitors. The second one is more for installers, and it adds a function to the RTA functionality of the system. So we have a spectrum analyzer. We have the ability to make measurements. What we don't And we have the ability to design boxes. What it doesn't take into account is the listening environment, the contribution of the listening environment, like the car. So with the Spectrum Analyzer, you'll be able to take a full range speaker, put it in a free field outside or in a big room. You do a measurement, take the frequency response measurement of that enclosure, that bookshelf speaker. Doesn't matter if it's not a good speaker, doesn't matter. You then take that same speaker and put it in the car, and you do the same measurement at the same level. The difference in those two measurements is the contribution of the listening environment. And you can now calculate the vehicle's overlay, or the effect that the car is going to have on the system that you're designing. And then you'll be able to save those particular RTA settings and then overlay those, like when you're modeling a box, for instance. Before you put it in a car, you want to know how it's going to affect it. So that's also coming. So I started off with a really strong measurement system. The hardware capabilities are there. All of you guys that have bought TermLab, I really appreciate your business. And everybody knows that this, every time there's a software update, it adds new features, new capabilities. That's the beauty of the system. Is we had the platform for the original TermLab was like 12 years long. And people are still using it, but they were able to update their software and take advantage of new capabilities for a long time. So they recover their investment in the amount of time that they can use it.
So it's awesome. We got 2 exclusives talking about what's coming. That's very awesome. And thanks for explaining more about what the tool does, because I'm like you. I think a lot of people don't really understand the capabilities, and they see the price. But if you really think about all the capabilities that are built in, it's really a good price. It's really a steal.
So one thing I wanted to add to that. So, we had the Magnum, and it sells for $749. And for a long time, we were selling this product called the Rebel, which was had scaled down hardware. It gave exactly the same measurements for SPL measurements, but it didn't have a lot of the input ports and XLRs and this and that and whatever. We sold a lot of those, but people then would call us saying, we'd like to trade it in so we can get the Magnum. They want the full-blown Magnum. We don't sell used equipment. I don't have any mechanism in place to do trades. So about a month or 2 months ago, when we sold out of the Rebels, we made a decision. When people buy we call it now the Rebel Edition, they get a full-blown Magnum with all the hardware. But the box has the firmware and the software limit some of the functionality of the system to only Rebel features. In the future, if someone wants to upgrade to the full-blown Magnum, then they just pay the difference in cost. So it's a software update only. So we're taking the gamble. If nobody ever upgrades, then we've wasted a lot of money on the additional hardware that's in those systems. But it gives the customer of the Rebel, if price is important to them, they can start off with the Rebel. And if they feel they want to do some additional things, most of the stuff is related to hosting shows, all of the database features and stuff like that. If they ever decide they need some of those additional capabilities, they can just order the software upgrade. It's a download, and it automatically will update. It'll make their box a full-blown Magnum. We don't even have to ship anything. So we'll see how that works. I think it's it gives the product some capability for upward mobility, and hopefully, it will entice people into buying the Rebel, because they won't be locked into it if they decide to upgrade.
Yeah,
Right.
that's incredibly smart. That's a page out of Intel's book. They had tried that, they had done that before, but definitely, and someone that wants to enter at the lower price point, maybe they don't have the whole 750 up front. Maybe, they got the 450, and next year maybe they'll get the other 300 or whatever. So that's awesome.
Well, thanks. We just have to do a better job of explaining the product. Mostly right now, our sales are all through word of mouth, or people see it at a show, or they come across our website. I don't have any videos of it online. I know there are a lot of videos online, but not ours. So in the future, that's one of my, in addition to those other things, which I'm already working on, that is where I'm really pushing, to do some training videos, some online marketing / training videos. I have one for Term Pro. So if you see that video, it'll be in similar vein to that. So with regard to DB drag racing, since we're talking about new things, we have a really great group of competitors, a global group of competitors. I travel 55,000 miles in November. I was in Brazil for South American Championship. I was in Australia for their championship, and I was in Tokyo for the Japanese championship. The month before that, we had championship in Russia and another one in Europe. So we have a bunch of competitors, and our rules are really, really good. There are not going to be any really significant rule changes this year. Just some, we're focused on fixing some things that are confusing about. There's a few, sometimes I just have to scratch my head and wonder how people how they can be confused by certain thing. But, when you have 50 different languages, the translation can sometimes be a problem. We're definitely thinking about adding 1 or 2 demo classes to our Cyclone format of competition. So demoing is big. We kind of have a problem with it here in the US, because anytime we try to do demo, we get shut down by the police. But if you go to South America, or you go to Japan, or some of these other places, they're not to that point yet. And there's a lot of beautiful cars that want to participate, but they can't do it against a traditional DB drag vehicle, which is mostly all about bass. And they don't, so we want to cater to everybody. We want to be a buffet, so that depending on what you're hungry for, you can pick and choose the formats you want to enter. By the first of the year, we'll have released the new rules. We'll have released the points requirements, and also we'll announce the location for the North American Championship, and also the European Championship, and the dates for the South American Championship also. So all of that's coming. I just like to wait until first of the year to do it.
Awesome. It's very exciting, all this news to hear, and thanks for giving us an update on the DB drag racing. I did have a question about that specifically. We've seen the numbers, the DB numbers, continue to go up. Do you think there is a maximum decibel level that can be reached in a vehicle?
There is, and I haven't. I calculated it one time. It's right at 200 dB, because what ends up happening is you run into an absolute vacuum on one side of the waveform. It's not like an atomic bomb where you can have all positive pressure. Our atmospheric pressure is like 15 psi, 14.7 psi. You start talking right around, and guys, don't hold me to these numbers. I'm just shooting from the hip here. It's been a long time, but somewhere around 199 or 200 dB, you reach the limits where the magnitude change is so great that you're up against that hard vacuum limit. You can't have less than a absolute vacuum. You can't have a negative vacuum. So when it gets to zero, it's zero, and that's where we're what sound is doing is modulating atmospheric pressure. So you could go minus 15 psi to plus 15 psi. The sensor I use is a 30 psi, 36 psi sensor. I think it's 36. But the reality is, when you get to 180 dB, 1 dB, you have this hockey stick function going on, a point of diminishing return, where the amount of power required the amount of acoustic power required becomes so great that it's unrealistic to think, that you're going to be able to get so high. But I will say this. So back when I was building a Terminator, there was a piece of plywood against the wall, and I had spray painted on there 165 dB. And that was like us saying 200 dB. In my mind, 165 was 200 dB, unattainable. And now people routinely do 165. Easy. I wouldn't say easy, but it's common. So, the loudest car out there right now is about 185 dB, 184.7. For him to get another dB, though, would take a tremendous amount of energy. So I think we have a while to go, before we run into that.
And I think, it's important for the old school guys to realize, like me, when I competed, it was on the AudioControl mic.
Yes.
And then the hard mic was the B&K. And that is, 3 to 5 dB higher than what the actual sensor, the actual dB was. And that's assuming that the calibration is correct and you don't have a hot mic and anything like that. So these numbers nowadays are much louder than the numbers we were getting back in the, the mid-late 90s.
That's a great point. So the Term Lab, compared to the original AudioControl microphone, the Term Lab is 8 dB lower than the original AudioControl. And the reason for that is at the time when I did the sensor, everybody said that the B&K, the B&K is the hard meter. That's the one to, and so the B&K uses a narrowband filter. And so the Term Lab mimics that narrowband measurement. It's like 5 hertz wide. If I were to do it now, I would not do that. And someday I want to change it. I'll have to. The problem is now we've got a global number of organizations using it. But for the people playing the burp tones, they're playing a sine wave anyway. It shouldn't really be the RMS average of 5 frequencies. It should just pick the bar that's the highest and use that one. So it would require some changes. I don't know if that would ever if I had my way, I would change it. But right now, everybody, you remember how it was when you were doing it. So imagine if you've been doing 165 on the AudioControl and all of a sudden you come in the lanes, you do a 157. You're going to hate that. You're going to hate that number, And so if we did anything that affects those measurements, it would definitely be a problem I don't think we'd get buy-in unless the number went up. Of course, if you did a 165 and all of a sudden you're doing a 172, you'd probably think is the best meter on the planet.
Oh yeah, we used to get phone calls like, "Hey, the mic's hot at this competition. Show up. You're going to do like a 160, a 150."
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Wayne, thank you so much for the time you devoted tonight. I know we've gone considerably longer than I originally thought we would, but I know that everybody who's listened here really enjoyed hearing the history, hear more about your products. And just so people know, the best place to go, termpro.com, if they want to learn more about DB Drag and also the products that you sell, the Term Labs and etc.
That's correct. Termpro.com. We've been online for a long time. If you root around there, you'll find some old school. I haven't focused so much on the project. Here's a dream of mine, and I've been wanting to do this for a long time. I've been collecting publications and all of these things, these show and tell things, my whole life. And I want to create, I call it a timeline project, where you'll be able to do a slider and it'll show the various things that happen and pictures, and people will be able to upload and submit their own milestone events or comment on or tag people in those. It's a huge undertaking, just to digitize all of the content. I want it to be searchable, but it's something that I want to do. It's almost like a hobby. And I even have the shear. I'm looking at it right now. I bought a special scanner and I've got a shear that cuts the splines off of publications so you can convert them into like searchable documents, PDF documents, or even HTML. So anyway, but yeah, that's if you root around the website, you'll see that. Of course, the sound off information is always up to date. We're tracking a bunch of competitors. You can see if you're a competitor, you already are familiar with the website. If you just want to see what it's about, go on one of the leaderboards and then drill down. Make sure you click on the competitors like stats. If you click on their stats, you can see graphs and charts showing their competition history and what their scores are and what the trends in their SPL were, how they stack up against everyone else. This is really cool, really powerful.
Yeah, DB Drag's always been a real classy organization. So there's been problems with SPL competitions, as you probably know, with many organizations, but you've always run this, and it's always been classy, and it people appreciate it, even though it wasn't local to my area. I always heard people talking good things like, "Oh, you should do DB Drag. DB Drag's fun." I didn't get to compete in it, but from what I've seen online, it's always been classy. So
I appreciate that. We have a great group of team, and I'm a great group of competitors, and there's one of them. Like if you click on one of these pictures, you'll see the competitor stats page. Now on the left, you see those buttons. One will say like DB Drag stats. If you click on that, okay, it'll show you a graph with some charts of different things, and then you scroll on down, you can see the various events that now this is just for 2018, but then if you click on any of those buttons, it'll actually show you the results for that particular show. And if there's photos of the show, you can actually see that. So it's really, really comprehensive amount of information here. But anyway, speaking to about the organization, I'm really proud of the people that we have involved. We're definitely not perfect, but I think that we have an A team of judges and competitors too. We really have been pushing our presentation, so we want our judges to have the correct attire. We want them to have like a tent or a backdrop like you see behind me. So think of McDonald's, where no matter where you go in the world, if you see a McDonald's, you go in there and order a Big Mac, you get a Big Mac. And we want that same type of consistency. We want our judges the officiating to be consistent. We want the presentation to be consistent. We want the brand image. We don't want any of the negativity. My judges we prohibit them. I want to say prohibit. That's not really the right word, but they're not supposed to engage in negative social media activity, because each one of those judges is an ambassador for the DB Drag Racing Association. Their behavior and their actions are a direct reflection on our company and on me. And you see what happens on social media, and this would be my thing that I would implore all of our listeners out there to consider. Two things. Number one, when you say something online, you have to assume that potential sponsors, car audio companies or others, are going to see that. And if you were reading the things if someone was reading what you were posting, would it make them want to be a part of that community or not? And then the second thing, and this goes out to all the DB Drag guys out there, and not just DB Drag, anybody that's a competitor, whether it's IASCA or USACI or NSPL or whatever, if every one of you would bring one new contestant to the judging lanes this year, next year will be twice as big. So that's profound in my mind. If everybody, how hard is it to bring one new person, to involve one new person? Anybody should be able to do that. And, the more people we have at the shows, the more exciting it is, the more fun it is. And it will build on itself. And we have a lot of momentum right now. I just want to keep that momentum going.
For good reason. As Rob said, you run very clean shows, and you you have much respect across the industry for what you've done in the past and what you're continuing to do today. And again, we greatly appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to sit down with us tonight and talk old school, which is our favorite, in addition to explaining your products and talking about some of the things that are coming. I think this has been a fantastic learning exercise for those who may not know that much about Mr. Wayne Harris and the things you've done over the years. It's been very impressive. So we are going to go ahead and sign off of the podcast here, unless, Rob, you have anything else to say?
No, I think we've covered it.
Okay, good. So those who are online on youtube.com/12vtalk, if you can stick around for just a couple minutes, we'll try to hit some of the hot questions that you have. If you're listening to this on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or Google Play Music, thanks for checking us out there. Make sure you check us out on youtube.com/12vtalk. Check out Mr. Wayne Harris on turnpro.com. You can see all of his products, also DB Drag Racing, and a lot of the other things that they're working on. So thanks again. Till next time, 12 Volt Talk. We're out of here. All right. Thank you, Wayne.
Yeah, that was awesome.
That was awesome. We went a lot longer than I thought we would, but honestly, I didn't even think we went that long until I just looked at my clock.
No, it felt like 20 minutes.
I feel like we went really fast and didn't even touch the tip of the iceberg.
I know we didn't, because there were some things I really wanted you to expand on, and I'm like, no, if we talk about that, we're never going to get to the current stuff. So
yeah, for sure.
Wow, it was that was really for me as well. I've used the amp dyno for a while and always considered the Term Lab to use in certain situations, but the more you've talked about it, the more it's got me interested in getting one of those to Trout as well. So
yeah, that's important. People think it's just it's like, oh, it's an SPL meter. Well, no, if you look at it, it's everything. I didn't know it do TL small parameters.
Well,
right.
The software for that isn't finished, but that's where it's coming really soon. So what I did with the Magnum is it's basically I used to, when I was at Rockford, I had an audio precision system too and a TEF 20 analyzer, and they're so expensive. But I use the TEF for one thing and the AP for another. I'm trying to make the Magnum do all of the most common things. So I don't want to do 100% of what they do. I just want to do 90%. If I can do the things that you use most, then at this price point, it's a great it's a great product. The thing is, nobody knows how to use it because it doesn't even have an owner's manual. That's how. I'm so excited about writing software and designing stuff. It's to take the time to do a training video or write a manual is not my favorite thing. It's like doing your taxes every year.
Oh man, we'd love to have you on an episode where we just go through all the things that it could do.
Sure,
just the whole episode go through.
It's people sometimes don't have the attention span to watch more than 3 minutes or 2 minutes. I don't know. Here's the thing. I didn't say that I don't even do social media. I have a Facebook presence, but if you see anything, it's from Celise. And even on my profile, I don't answer Messenger because that allows people to drive my agenda. Those messages come in nonstop. They could interrupt you. And if people they send you a message and you don't respond right away, then they get pissed off, that you're ignoring them. And so I don't want that. But, I'm definitely not the best social media or, you guys definitely have it going on. Slee seems to know quite a bit about it, but I think it's a real lost opportunity right now for, the product doesn't have any examples on how to use it or videos. We'll fix that for sure.
Yeah, that's definitely an importance these days for sure. Somebody asked a question about the 24-inch woofers. Those were MTX, but were they actually made by MTX or were they made by somebody else?
No, they were those woofers were never made by MTX. They were Fane woofers, Fane. They were made for those are Pro Sound. They're sound reinforcement drivers. But MTX is one of my sponsors. Remember, they were one of the people that really sponsored me in the beginning. And so I made dust caps. They're actually foam core, just painted with the MTX logo on them. And then I glued them right to the speakers. And so, that's why people think they're MTX. It's good for MTX's image, but they weren't made by MTX.
Gotcha. That 30-inch sub before that with a 1-inch voice coil.
Yeah,
I never heard that one before, that it had a 1-inch voice coil and a 30-inch speaker.
I don't think it was. I think it was 2-inch.
Maybe 2, but still, 30-inch speaker with a 2-inch voice coil. That's like unbelievable.
Yeah, it was.
Let's see. I was just trying to see if there are any other hot topic questions here.
We had a few people ask, what equipment do you run, if anything, in your vehicles right now?
I do not have anything in my. Well, first of all, I don't have anything in my car. I have a Ford F-150, which has 3,000 miles on it. And so this is how much I drive. I bought that truck in June and I just turned over 3,000 miles and the vast majority of it was on one trip. So I'm not in my car a lot. I don't drive a lot at all. So I don't have anything in there.
Rob and I are both consider ourselves somewhat historians of the car audio industry. So we seeing that little booklet you had there of all your your drawings and everything of Eruption, that's just had me foaming at the mouth just to think, to have actual scans and stuff of all that. And I know you're talking about the whole timeline thing, which again to us is just gold, and we appreciate you even being interested in doing things like that, because I think a lot of people maybe that are in the car audio now, even the younger kids are just getting in, for them to understand the struggles and everything that has happened throughout the years to get it where it is now, and how easy it is. Like you said, you get a 1,000-watt amp for $150 now. I mean, it's just a good time to be in car audio right now. It really is.
Well, think how cool it would be. I've always pushed everybody to upload event photos, and we have every set of results all the way back to the beginning on our website. You can find out who won in 1994, and for those pictures, people don't think it's important the day that they take the picture, but I guarantee you, in 10 years, those pictures become priceless. And if I can make it, we have hundreds of thousands of photos on the website, but right now we don't know who the people are. And if we had a timeline where people could go in, and it's almost a Wikipedia type thing for car audio where you can filter, like you'll be able to filter. I put a lot of thought into it. So you don't want to see events, or you want to see finals only, or USA only, or you only want to see comments from the DBDRA. But for instance, if you guys you saw a picture from the old days and you recognize some of the people in there, you could write a story. People can contribute their recollection. I remember that show. That's the first time I met Alma Gates, and blah, 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 this and that and whatever. It adds a whole nother dimension. And once we have it, it's forever. Because the one thing I don't like about Facebook is it's transitory. The information gets posted, the pictures get posted, but it just disappears and you can't find it. And everybody has their own page. There's no single repository. And I think, Term Pro definitely, we have a huge head start in that regard. I have all the information. I don't have all of it, but I have 30 file boxes of stuff at least. And I'd like to digitize it and then discard it, because it's taking up so much room. Once you digitize it, it's destructive. When you cut these books, then there's no going back. And I don't want to throw these books away. Maybe people will want them. That way, you know, it'll be, I don't feel guilty about tossing them.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm sure
I
we'll
definitely
find a
want
way.
one
Yeah,
before somebody else gets them all.
yeah, we can find a way. If nothing else, we can
Yeah.
get them to Rob and I, and then we will disperse them if that's easier for you.
Sure.
However we can do that. But just going through any other questions. Somebody asked about Wayne's first stereo. We did talk about that already, so you can scroll back
Yeah.
once the video goes live, and you can hear about Wayne's first stereo. And
Are people listening in right now?
they are, yeah. We're
Okay.
still live on YouTube, but we stopped the audio version that's going to go on the podcasting applications that you can listen to in your car through your phone.
So I will tell you a real quick story. When I was like probably 10 or 11, my dad bought an 8-track player for his Blazer, and he wanted me to help him put it in. And believe it or not, I knew how to hook up speakers by then. I was hooking stuff up. I was taking across part radios and stuff. But he bought this tape. It was like the Nashville Brass play the Nashville Sound. And there's an 8-track, and that's like the only 8-track we owned. And a few years ago, I bought a copy of the LP of that music on eBay. So to bring back the memories. That was the first time I did a stereo in a car. It was the 8-track.
That's cool. I was hoping that I could find real quick a picture of the BiPolar 650. One of our buddies has been looking for one for like 15 years, and he found one. Guess it was what, Rob, about a year ago?
Oh, Schultz.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so anyway, I was going to show you the picture, but yeah, we know of at least one that survived throughout
The Purge.
the time. That's right, the Purge.
So you know what's cool here? In my book, let's see, I have my spec sheet for the 650 and letters from Rockford, and it's just way cool. I mean, I would have never gone through this stuff. I even have the manual for that CDX5 CD player. I don't have this anymore. I don't know what happened to it, but yeah, it's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's the kind of things you can't just find on the internet because nobody, has ever scanned that in or anything, but that's awesome. Rob, what's the one that I just got? Was it a CDX5 or a CDX7 that I got this summer? Actually, it was down
was it the 500?
No, I think it was a CDX5, I think, or a 7.
What we got in Texas?
Yeah.
You got one of them. I can't remember. It was wrapped in plastic.
Yeah, I'll let you know, Wayne. I haven't even gone through the box yet, but I did get one. Actually, it was the same day that you were there. One of the guys had one of the old Sonys. He said the CD mechanism didn't work, but I didn't really care because I just wanted to show it off to people to show them what the old units look like. Because, we have the benefit today of 4K high definition video.
Yeah.
We can show off this stuff that back in the day, you were lucky to have a VHS camcorder back then to capture it in 320 by 240 resolution. So it's cool to show it off in 2018.
This is just super cool. There's the complete installation manual for the Power 650, including amplifier block diagrams and Z preamps, and it's all typewritten. Like that was the state of the company back then. It's loose leaf, looks like it was done on a typewriter. It's about 30 pages long. See, that's the kind of stuff I get it online, and then it'll be a great resource for people. Yeah, that's a brochure looking thing. That's cool. Well, the thing I wish I had was that, I wish I had a mint Sansui 9090. That's not car stereo, but that was, I can't believe I sold that.
Yeah, but you can't keep everything, right?
Yeah, it didn't seem, I sold it for what I bought it for. I thought I got a good deal, but now I wished I had it because it was, it's sentimental. That's really what it comes down to.
Absolutely. So I guess one final question, I think I know the answer to this because you've already said it. Is car audio still a passion or just a job?
Well, I can tell you this, that most of the people that I'm associated with are not doing it for a job. They're doing it because they love what they do. Like, for instance, I do DB drag racing, at more of a hobby than anything. I could be working at any company in this industry, but this is what I love to do. I love going to the shows. And even when I go to these international shows, it just reinvigorates me. It makes me realize why I got in it in the first place. Now, the best case is when you can make your job your passion. Then you're not working ever. You're getting paid to do what you love to do. That's where I feel that a lot of the people that I know that are in the industry, they're not doing it because they have to do it. They're doing it because it's what they choose to do, and they get compensated for their abilities. So it's kind of both. But I'll tell you one thing that I see, that we went through the purge in 12 volt for sure. A lot of companies didn't make it. There's a lot fewer manufacturers, there's a lot fewer retailers, but the people that did make it, they survived because they know they were doing something right, and it made them stronger. And none of those are box movers. They are doing the custom high performance, where price isn't the thing. It's not about how cheap you can sell something. It's about, can I get you guys, can you even fit me in your schedule? So they changed the way they do business. They're selling things you can't order on Amazon or eBay. And that has made them successful, and they can charge a premium for their knowledge.
All right. Well, that was an excellent discussion. Thank you again for your time. And we will, Rob, unless you have anything else, we'll let Mr. Harris go.
Oh, well, if you need help with those Turn Pro videos, I know two guys.
Thanks, guys.
I'm definitely going to talk to you about getting one and learning more about how it functions. And I think, I have a pretty sizable YouTube audience at this time, and continuing to grow. And the type of things like that, to me, is educating the community. It's not,
Sure.
not like doing a product video for you in any essence. It's more or less doing it for the people, and that's kind of who I answer to. But yeah, I think a lot of people would be interested in seeing the capabilities of what the Term Lab does and what it can do. So
I'm glad you guys are involved. I mean, there's a lot of internet superstars out there that they don't know anything, and unfortunately, it causes everybody, the misinformation and the inaccurate information creates a challenge, because you have to overcome that. So when there's people out there, like you guys, and you've been there, you've done that, and you know what you're talking about, everything you do is contributing to the underlying knowledge, that we really, really need. When the manufacturers quit doing the training, like RTTI and stuff, it created this huge vacuum, and we have a whole nother generation of people that didn't go through that. So everything they're learning online. And unfortunately, sometimes it's right and sometimes it's not. So anyway, thanks for everything you guys are doing.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you. We appreciate that. And again, thank you for your time. Everybody who joined us live, thank you for joining on YouTube. And yeah, awesome. Well, maybe we'll do a follow-up sometime when you have some free time again. We'd love to have you on. Maybe once you get more software changes or have any product updates or anything like that, we'd be glad to have you on again and talk about some of that, and help get your information out there to the masses.
Well, thanks.
So thanks again. Tell Celise we said hello, and thanks for allowing you to spend time with us. And she is great. I don't know her that well, but the limited time I've had with her, she's awesome, man. So you did good.
Yeah, she's good.
All right. Take care, Wayne. Have a good night.
Thank you. All right. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.